I have shown you my license, my registration.
I'll decide what's valid. How'd you pay for this vehicle?
With my own money. Same way anyone does.
Right, cars like this don't come from honest work. Not in your...
Security guard Michael Brennan saw a black man sitting in the lobby with a guitar case at his feet, and without observing any threatening behavior or attempting to speak with the man, Brennan called 911 and reported a suspicious individual with a possible weapon, because in his mind, a black man with a large case in a hospital lobby couldn't be anything but a threat. When officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rollins arrived, they approached the black man, Victor Ellison, and demanded he open the case immediately or he would be arrested for obstruction and failure to cooperate with a lawful investigation. What security guard Brennan and the responding officers didn't know was that Victor Ellison was a professional musician who had played on Grammy-nominated albums, that the case contained a $12,000 vintage Martin guitar he had just picked up from a luthier, and that Brennan's racially motivated call and the officer's aggressive response would trigger a lawsuit that would cost the hospital and the city nearly $1 million. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe a black man should be able to sit in a hospital lobby with a guitar case without police being called, like this video and subscribe. Memorial Hospital on a Thursday afternoon in mid-April looked exactly the way hospital lobbies always look. People sitting in chairs waiting for appointments, visitors checking in at the front desk, staff members in scrubs moving between departments with clipboards and tablets, the sound of phones ringing at the reception desk, the low hum of conversations, the occasional announcement over the PA system calling doctors to different floors. It was busy but not chaotic, routine but not quiet, and nobody in that lobby was doing anything that would make a reasonable person feel unsafe. Victor Ellison sat in a chair near the east wall of the lobby, with his phone in one hand and a guitar case resting upright on the floor between his feet. He was 42 years old, a professional session musician and guitarist who had spent the last 20 years playing on albums for artists whose names people would recognize, performing in studios across 3 states, and building a reputation as someone you called when you needed a guitarist who could play anything from jazz to blues to classical without needing more than one take. He was wearing dark jeans, a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and clean leather shoes that had seen some wear but were well maintained. His hair was neat, his appearance was professional, and he looked like exactly what he was. A working musician who had somewhere to be later and was killing time while he waited. He had been sitting in that chair for about 25 minutes, and he was there because his wife Angela had a follow-up appointment with her cardiologist on the 3rd floor. The appointment was running a little long, which wasn't unusual for cardiology appointments, so Victor had texted her to let her know he was downstairs in the lobby and would wait for her there. He had his guitar with him because he had just picked it up from a luthier who had spent 3 weeks doing restoration work on a vintage 1968 Martin D28 that Victor had bought at an estate sale 2 years earlier. The guitar was worth about $12,000 now that the restoration was complete, and Victor wasn't about to leave it in his car in a hospital parking lot while he waited. He scrolled through his emails, responded to a text from a producer asking if he was available for a session next week, and checked the time. Angela's appointment should be finishing up in the next 10 minutes. He put his phone in his pocket and looked around the lobby, watching people come and go, not thinking about anything in particular. That was when Michael Brennan walked past. Brennan was 48 years old and had been working as a security guard at Memorial Hospital for 6 years. He wore a uniform that included a badge, a radio clipped to his belt, and an expression that suggested he took his job very seriously. Over those 6 years, Brennan had built a reputation among the hospital staff for being overly vigilant in ways that some people found reassuring and others found uncomfortable. He had been the subject of 3 formal complaints from black visitors to the hospital, all of them claiming he had followed them through the building, questioned them about why they were there, or treated them with suspicion when they were just visiting family members or waiting for appointments. All 3 complaints had been filed with hospital administration, noted in his personnel file, and addressed with verbal warnings that never resulted in any actual disciplinary action. Brennan walked through the lobby on his routine patrol, and his eyes landed on Victor sitting in the chair with the guitar case at his feet. He slowed his pace and stopped about 15 feet away, standing near a column where he could watch Victor without being directly in his line of sight. Brennan stared at Victor for a full 2 minutes, watching him scroll through his phone, watching him adjust the guitar case slightly so it wasn't blocking the aisle, watching him do absolutely nothing that could be considered threatening or suspicious. But in Brennan's mind, none of that mattered. What Brennan saw was a black man sitting in a hospital lobby with a large case, and his brain filled in the rest with assumptions that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with bias. A black man with a case that size could be carrying anything. A weapon, drugs, something dangerous. And even though Victor was sitting calmly, dressed professionally, and doing nothing more threatening than checking his phone, Brennan had already decided what he was looking at. Brennan walked away from the column and went directly to the security office on the first floor. He sat down at the desk, picked up the phone, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered. 911? What's your emergency? Brennan's voice was calm, but carried a tone of urgency designed to make the dispatcher take him seriously. This is Michael Brennan, security at Memorial Hospital. I have a suspicious individual in the main lobby. Black male, mid-40s, sitting alone with a large case. The case could contain a weapon. I need officers here immediately. The dispatcher's voice came back with a series of standard questions. Has the individual made any threats or displayed any weapons? No, but he's been sitting there for a while now, just watching people. I don't recognize him, and the case is large enough to hold something dangerous. I need officers here to check it out. Are there any other threatening behaviors you've observed? Brennan hesitated for just a second because the honest answer was no. Victor hadn't done anything. But Brennan had already made the call, and backing down now would make him look like he had overreacted. He's acting suspicious, just sitting there. I think you should send someone. The dispatcher confirmed the address and told Brennan that officers were being dispatched. Brennan hung up the phone and walked back out to the lobby, positioning himself where he could keep an eye on Victor while he waited for the police to arrive. Victor had no idea any of this was happening. He was still sitting in his chair, still scrolling through his phone, still waiting for Angela to finish her appointment. He looked up once and saw Brennan standing near the entrance watching him, and he thought it was a little odd that a security guard was staring at him, but he didn't think much of it. Security guards watched people. That was their job. 7 minutes later, 2 police officers walked through the front entrance of the hospital. Officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rollins were both in uniform, both carrying the weight of their equipment belts and both walking with the kind of purposeful stride that made people in the lobby turn and look. Doyle was 35 years old with 8 years on the force, and Rollins was 29 with 4 years of experience. They had responded to the call about a suspicious person with a possible weapon, and the dispatcher had told them the security guard at the hospital believed the individual might be armed. Brennan met them near the entrance and pointed across the lobby toward Victor. That's him, with the case. He's been sitting there for about half an hour. I think there might be a weapon inside. Doyle looked across the lobby at Victor, who was still sitting in his chair looking at his phone, completely unaware that he was being discussed. Doyle's hand moved instinctively to rest near his service weapon, and Rollins did the same. They walked across the lobby together, their eyes locked on Victor and the guitar case at his feet. Victor looked up when he saw 2 uniformed officers walking directly toward him, and his stomach dropped slightly because he knew from experience that when police approached a black man with that kind of a focus, it usually wasn't because they wanted to have a friendly conversation. The officers stopped directly in front of him, and Doyle spoke first, his voice loud and authoritative. Sir, we need you to open that case, right now. Victor looked up at both officers, confusion and caution mixing on his face. Excuse me? What's this about? Rollins stepped closer, his hand still near his weapon. We received a report of a suspicious individual with a possible weapon. Open the case and show us what's inside. Victor's voice stayed calm, but there was an edge of frustration underneath it. It's a guitar. I'm waiting for my wife. She has an appointment upstairs. Why are you treating me like I did something wrong? Doyle's tone got sharper. Sir, we're not going to ask again. Open the case now, or you'll be arrested for obstruction and failure to cooperate with a lawful investigation. Victor stared at both officers for a moment, and the reality of what was happening settled over him with a weight he had felt before but never gotten used to. He was being treated like a criminal for sitting in a hospital lobby with a guitar case. Not because he had done anything wrong, not because he had threatened anyone, but because someone had looked at him and decided he was a threat. He reached down, unlatched the guitar case, and opened it. Inside was a beautiful vintage Martin D28 acoustic guitar, the wood polished to a deep amber glow. The strings freshly replaced, the craftsmanship unmistakable to anyone who knew anything about instruments. Doyle and Rollins both looked at the guitar. Rollins's hand moved away from his weapon. Doyle's expression didn't change. Victor looked up at both of them. It's a guitar. Like I said. Now can someone explain to me why police were called on me for sitting in a hospital lobby? Michael Brennan, who had been standing a few feet away watching the entire interaction, stepped forward. His voice carried no apology, no recognition that he might have made a mistake. I was just doing my job. You look suspicious. You can never be too careful these days. Victor's voice was quiet but hard. Suspicious? I was sitting, with a guitar case, What exactly was suspicious about that? Brennan crossed his arms. You were just sitting there for a long time. I didn't recognize you. And in that moment, Victor Ellison understood exactly what had happened. He had been racially profiled. Police had been called. He had been threatened with arrest. All because a security guard saw a black man with a case and couldn't imagine any scenario where that wasn't a threat. Victor pulled out his phone and started recording. I want all of your names and badge numbers. Because this is discrimination, and I'm not letting this go. Victor Ellison held his phone up and kept it pointed at Michael Brennan, officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rollins, and the guitar case that was still open at his feet, showing exactly what he had said it contained all along. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made it clear he wasn't going to let this moment pass without documentation. I want all of your names and badge numbers. Every single one of you. Because what just happened here is racial profiling and I'm filing a complaint. Brennan stepped back slightly, his arms still crossed, his expression defensive. I was doing my job. Security protocols require me to report anything suspicious. Victor's eyes stayed locked on him. What was suspicious? Tell me exactly what I did that was suspicious. Brennan hesitated for a second, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its confidence. You were sitting there with a large case for a long time. I didn't know what was inside. I didn't recognize you. Victor's voice got quieter, but somehow more forceful. So because you didn't recognize me, and because I had a guitar case, you called 911 and told them I might have a weapon. That's your justification? Brennan didn't answer. Officer Doyle stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. Sir, we were responding to a call. When security reports a potential threat, we have to investigate. You can understand that. Victor looked at Doyle and shook his head slowly. No, I don't understand that. Because I wasn't a threat. I was sitting in a chair. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't acting erratically. I wasn't doing anything that a reasonable person would call threatening. And you came over here and told me I'd be arrested if I didn't open my guitar case. That's not an investigation. That's intimidation. Rollins tried to interject, his tone slightly softer than Doyle's. We were just following procedures. Once we saw it was a guitar, we... You what? Victor interrupted. You apologized? You acknowledged that maybe calling police on a man sitting quietly in a hospital was an overreaction? No. Your security guard standing right there just doubled down and said he was doing his job. Other people in the lobby had stopped what they were doing and were now watching the interaction. An elderly white woman sitting 3 chairs away spoke up, her voice shaking slightly with anger. I've been sitting here longer than he has. Nobody called the police on me. Nobody asked me to open my purse. A young man near the entrance added, I've got a backpack. Nobody demanded I show them what's inside. Another visitor, a middle-aged black woman, stood up from her chair and walked closer. This is exactly what we're talking about. This man was sitting here minding his business, and somebody saw a black man with a case and decided he must be dangerous. That's profiling. That's discrimination. Brennan's face was starting to flush now, and his voice got defensive again. I treat everyone the same. I don't care what color someone is. I saw something that looked out of place, and I reported it. That's my job. Victor's voice cut through the room. If you treat everyone the same, then why didn't you ask me what was in the case before you called 911? Why didn't you have a conversation with me? Why did your first instinct go straight to calling police and saying I might have a weapon? Brennan had no answer for that. A hospital supervisor who had been working at the front desk heard the raised voices and walked over to see what was happening. Her name tag identified her as Karen Mitchell, and when she saw the open guitar case, the 2 police officers, and the small crowd of people watching, her expression shifted immediately to concern. What's going on here? She asked, looking between Brennan and the officers. Doyle started to explain, but Victor spoke first. Your security guard racially profiled me. He called police and told them I had a possible weapon. I've been sitting here for half an hour waiting for my wife, and the only thing I did wrong was exist while black with a guitar case. Karen looked at Brennan. Michael, is that true? Did you call police? Brennan nodded. I saw him sitting with the case. I didn't know what was inside. I thought it was safer to... Safer? Victor's voice rose slightly. Safer for who? You didn't feel safe because a black man was sitting in a hospital lobby? That's the problem. That's exactly the problem. Karen looked at the guitar case, then at Victor, and the reality of what had happened was written all over her face. She knew this was bad. She knew the hospital had just made a serious mistake. Sir, I am so sorry. This should not have happened. Can we talk about this privately? Victor shook his head. No, we're not doing this privately. You want to talk? We talk right here, because I want everyone in this lobby to hear what I'm about to say. He looked at Brennan, then at the officers, then at Karen. I'm a professional musician. I've played on Grammy-nominated albums. I've worked with artists you've heard on the radio. That guitar in that case is worth $12,000, and I just picked it up from a luthier who spent 3 weeks restoring it. I came here to wait for my wife while she finished an appointment. And I was treated like a criminal because your security guard couldn't imagine a scenario where a black man with a case wasn't a threat. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady and cold. I'm filing a formal complaint. I'm requesting all security footage from this lobby. I'm contacting my attorney, and I'm making sure that what happened here today doesn't get swept under the rug. Karen tried to respond, but Victor wasn't finished. You can apologize all you want, but apologies don't change the fact that I was sitting here peacefully and police were called on me. Apologies don't change the fact that I was threatened with arrest for not opening my guitar case fast enough. And apologies definitely don't change the fact that this happens to black people every single day in places just like this. And most of them don't have the resources to fight back. Just then, the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened, and Angela Ellison stepped out. She saw Victor standing with his phone in his hand, saw the 2 police officers, saw the crowd of people watching, and her face went from confusion to anger in the span of about 2 seconds. She walked quickly across the lobby. Victor, what's going on? Victor turned to her, and his expression softened slightly. They called the police on me for sitting here with my guitar. Angela looked at Brennan, then at the officers, and her voice came out sharp and furious. You did what? And the situation, which was already tense, was about to get much worse for everyone involved. Angela Ellison stood in the middle of the hospital lobby, with her hands on her hips and her eyes moving between Michael Brennan, officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rollins, and the hospital supervisor Karen Mitchell, and the fury in her expression made it very clear that she was not interested in hearing excuses or apologies. She had just finished a 2-hour cardiology appointment, and she had walked downstairs expecting to find her husband waiting peacefully, not standing in front of police officers with a crowd of witnesses watching. Someone better explain to me right now why my husband was threatened with arrest for sitting in a hospital lobby. Karen tried to step in first, her voice careful and diplomatic. Ma'am, there was a misunderstanding. Our security guard saw your husband with a large case and called police as a precaution. We're very sorry for any... Angela cut her off immediately. A misunderstanding? He was sitting with his guitar. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racial profiling. Brennan tried to defend himself again, his voice getting louder. I didn't know it was a guitar. The case was large. I was concerned for public safety. Angela turned on him and her voice dropped to something cold and precise. Public safety. My husband is a professional musician. He's been playing guitar for 25 years. He's worked on albums that have been nominated for Grammys. He was sitting here waiting for me, and you decided he was a threat because you couldn't imagine a black man with a guitar case doing anything but carrying a weapon. She pulled out her own phone and opened it to a website. You want to know who my husband is? Let me show you. She held up the screen, and on it was Victor's professional website showing his discography, his credits, photos of him in recording studios with artists whose names everyone in that lobby would recognize, and a list of albums he had played on over the past 2 decades. He's played with John Legend. He's played with Alicia Keys. He's been a session musician for major labels. That guitar in that case is worth more than your monthly salary, and you treated him like a criminal. Karen looked at the phone screen and her face went pale. Doyle and Rollins exchanged glances, both of them starting to realize just how badly this situation had gone. Victor spoke up, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made everyone go quiet. I want the security footage from this lobby. All of it. From the moment I walked in until right now. I want the 911 call that your security guard made. I want the dispatch recording. I want all of it documented and preserved. Karen nodded quickly. Of course. We'll make sure you have access to everything. I also want Michael Brennan's personnel file, because I'm willing to bet this isn't the first time he's profiled someone. Karen hesitated, and that hesitation told Victor everything he needed to know. There are other complaints, aren't there? Victor's voice got quieter. Other people who were treated like I was treated. Other black visitors who were followed, questioned, made to feel like they didn't belong here. Karen didn't answer, but her expression confirmed it. Angela pulled out her phone again and made a call. It rang twice before someone answered. Marcus, it's Angela. I need you to meet us at Memorial Hospital. Victor was racially profiled by security and police were called on him. We need an attorney. Now. She stayed on the phone for another minute, giving details, and when she hung up, she looked at Karen. Our attorney is on his way. He'll be here in 20 minutes, and when he gets here, we're going to start talking about a lawsuit. Karen's voice was shaking now. Please, let's not escalate this. We can resolve this internally. We can... Resolve it internally? Angela's voice was sharp. You had police threaten to arrest my husband for sitting in your lobby. You can't resolve that internally. That's a civil rights violation. Victor pulled up the recording he had made on his phone and played it back. Brennan's voice came through clearly. I was just doing my job. You look suspicious. Then Victor's response. What was suspicious about me sitting with a guitar case? And Brennan's answer. You were just sitting there for a long time. I didn't recognize you. Victor stopped the recording and he looked at Karen. That's racial profiling, documented, on tape, and I'm going to make sure everyone hears it. By that evening, the story had already started to spread. Victor's attorney, Marcus Reed, arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes and immediately requested all security footage, the 911 call recording, and Michael Brennan's personnel file. The hospital's legal team, realizing how serious this was, began conducting their own internal investigation. What they found made the situation exponentially worse. Michael Brennan had been the subject of 3 formal complaints over his 6 years at Memorial Hospital. All 3 complaints came from black visitors. The first complaint, filed 2 years earlier, was from a black doctor who worked at a different hospital and was visiting a colleague. Brennan had followed him through the building and demanded to see his credentials, refusing to believe he was a physician. The second complaint came from a black woman visiting her mother in the ICU. Brennan had questioned why she was there and asked to see identification even though visitor policies didn't require it. The third complaint was from a black man who had been sitting in the lobby waiting for his son to finish physical therapy. Brennan had watched him for 15 minutes before approaching and asking what he was doing there. All 3 complaints had been filed. All 3 had been noted in Brennan's personnel file. And all 3 had been dismissed with verbal warnings that resulted in no disciplinary action. The hospital had documented evidence of a pattern, and they had done nothing to address it. When Victor's attorney received the personnel file and saw the pattern of complaints, he knew immediately that this case was going to be much bigger than a single incident. This was systemic. This was a hospital that had allowed a security guard to racially profile visitors for years, and it had taken an incident involving a professional musician with resources and a platform to finally force accountability. Victor and Angela sat in Marcus Reed's office 2 days later, and Marcus laid out what he had found. They knew. The hospital knew Brennan had a pattern. They documented it, and they let him keep working. That's negligence. That's deliberate indifference. And that's going to cost them. Marcus looked at Victor. We're filing a federal lawsuit, racial discrimination, violation of your civil rights, emotional distress, and we're seeking $920,000 in damages. Victor nodded. Do it. The lawsuit filed by Victor Ellison against Memorial Hospital and security guard Michael Brennan moved through the legal system with a speed that reflected just how indefensible the hospital's position was. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Security footage showed Victor sitting peacefully in the lobby for 25 minutes before Brennan made the 911 call. The dispatch recording captured Brennan describing Victor as suspicious, based on nothing more than the fact that he was a black man with a case. The hospital's own personnel files documented 3 prior complaints against Brennan, all from black visitors, all describing the same pattern of profiling and suspicion. The hospital's attorneys reviewed the evidence and made the calculation that no jury would side with them. A well-known professional musician racially profiled while waiting for his wife. A security guard with a documented history of complaints that were ignored. Security footage showing a man doing nothing but sitting quietly before police were called. The case was a civil rights attorney's dream and a defendant's nightmare. Memorial Hospital settled the lawsuit for $920,000 within 8 months. The settlement included not just monetary compensation but a comprehensive list of reforms that Victor's attorney had demanded. The hospital was required to terminate Michael Brennan immediately, implement mandatory bias training for all security personnel, establish an independent review process for any complaints involving racial profiling, install clear written protocols stating that security could not call police on visitors without documented threatening behavior, and conduct quarterly audits of security incident reports to identify patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Michael Brennan was fired 3 weeks after the incident. He was 48 years old with 6 years of experience in hospital security, and his termination was based on racial profiling, making a false report to police, and demonstrating a pattern of discriminatory conduct that the hospital had documented but failed to address. He appealed the termination, and his appeal was denied. No other hospital in the region would hire him once background checks revealed the reason for his firing. He eventually found work as a night shift security guard at a shopping mall, making half of what he had earned at the hospital, and his name remained permanently attached to the case as it was covered by local and national media. Officers Patrick Doyle and Matthew Rollins were not disciplined by their department, as they had been responding to a call and had no way of knowing that the security guard's report was based entirely on racial bias. However, the incident became a key example in new department training on how to respond to suspicious person calls. Officers were now required to assess the situation independently rather than simply acting on the caller's characterization, to ask clarifying questions before making demands, and to understand that threatening arrest for asserting constitutional rights violated department policy and the law. The case had a ripple effect beyond Memorial Hospital. 3 other hospitals in the city conducted their own internal reviews of security complaint records and found similar patterns of ignored complaints involving Black and Latino visitors. 2 other security guards with complaint histories were terminated. Hospital systems across the region updated their security protocols and training programs, using Victor's case as a cautionary example of what happens when patterns of bias are documented but not addressed. Victor used a portion of the settlement to establish a music education fund that provided instruments and lessons to underprivileged youth in underserved communities. He continued his successful career as a session musician and became a vocal advocate against racial profiling in public spaces. He gave interviews, spoke at conferences, and shared his story to highlight how racial bias operates even in places like hospitals where people are supposed to feel safe. The vintage Martin guitar that had been at the center of the incident remained one of Victor's most prized possessions. He played it on several high-profile recording sessions after the lawsuit was settled, and he would occasionally tell the story of how that guitar had been mistaken for a weapon by a security guard who couldn't imagine a Black man in a hospital lobby being anything other than a threat. 5 years later, Memorial Hospital has not had another incident of racial profiling by security staff. The reforms implemented as part of the settlement remain in place, and the independent review board has processed dozens of complaints with transparency and accountability. Michael Brennan still works night shifts at a shopping mall, and his name is still the first result when you search for examples of racial profiling in healthcare settings. The security footage of Victor sitting peacefully with his guitar case, followed by police approaching him with aggression, is now used in training programs across the country as a clear demonstration of how racial bias can turn a harmless situation into a civil rights violation. The 911 call where Brennan describes Victor as suspicious for sitting with a case is played in workshops on implicit bias to show how assumptions based on race can lead to law enforcement responses that have no basis in actual threat. The lesson was expensive, public, and permanent. A guitar case is not a weapon. Sitting in a hospital lobby while Black is not suspicious. And institutions that document patterns of discrimination but fail to act will pay the price in lawsuits, reforms, and reputations that take years to rebuild. Victor Ellison never got an apology from Michael Brennan, but he got something more important. Accountability, reform, and a $920,000 settlement that sent a message to every hospital, every security company, and every person in a position of authority. Racial profiling has consequences, and those consequences are expensive. If you believe a professional musician should be able to sit in a hospital lobby without police being called on him, share the story. What reforms do you think hospitals need to prevent security guards from profiling visitors? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this reminded you that a guitar case is not a weapon and sitting peacefully is not a crime, subscribe. We're not stopping until every person can exist in public spaces without being treated like a threat based on the color of their skin. Asterisk.